Hello everybody. I thought I would make a very short and crisp video about oogenesis as it is highly volatile. So we'll divide it into what happens to the oocyte and what happens to the follicle separately. So there'll be three phases that we'll be discussing about. That would be before birth, birth to puberty, and puberty to menopause. Okay. So first we'll see what happens to the oocyte. Okay. So initially there will be something called as oogonia in the body. Okay, there will be almost 2 million before birth. Okay, so the chromosome number would be 46. So what happens to it is it enters into mitotic division. Okay, so into mitotic division it is going to give the same amount of chromosomes, and these cells would be called as daughter cells. Okay, so next would be something called as meiotic division. So once it enters into the meiotic division, it gets arrested in something called as prophase 1. Okay, so once it gets arrested in prophase 1, I mean this is going to be that one. Okay, so this cell is going to be called as primary oocyte. Okay, so this primary oocyte is still present before birth. Okay, that's what we're discussing about. So this primary oocyte, I'll let you know what happens when it comes to the follicle's point of view. So the follicle that would be formed when the primary oocyte is surrounded by a single layer of a specific type of cell called as granulosa cell. Okay, so this is called as granulosa cells. Okay, and this is the very old same primary oocyte. This entity of primary oocyte surrounded by granulosa cell is called as a primordial follicle. Okay, so all of these things are happening before birth. So what happens once the girl is going to enter into her adolescent phase? So that is when the primordial follicle enters into the puberty. Okay, so here what happens is the only difference is that the granulosa cells is going to increase in size. I mean, yeah, size and in number. Okay, so that is going to be called as primary follicle. Okay, and the next phase would be a secondary follicle. The difference is that there will be an additional external layer called as theca cell, and there will be some fluid filled cavities. Okay, and the next phase would be a mature follicle, also called as a Graafian follicle. Okay, still the primary oocyte is patiently waiting inside. Okay, the difference here would be an antrum. Okay, so now what happens is we would have studied there will be LH surge and all. So once that LH surge comes, ovulation would take place. That is, the primary oocyte is going to come out. Okay, so we would come back to here, all right? That is the patiently waiting primary oocyte, which is being arrested in meiotic prophase 1. So finally, it's going to get completed. Okay, so this would give rise to something called as a secondary oocyte. Okay, along with this, there will be a useless polar body, and that would be called as the first polar body. Okay, immediately what happens to this primary oocyte is that now once again it is going to go into something called as meiotic phase, but now it's going to get stuck in something different. That would be a metaphase 2. Okay, that's the same secondary oocyte. Okay, first we'll see what happens to the fate of secondary oocyte, and then we'll see what happens to the fate of the follicle. Okay, so the secondary oocyte is just basically stuck in metaphase 2, right? So in order to relieve it from the jail, that is the metaphase 2, some prince charming has to come in. Okay, it's nothing but the sperm. Okay, so it's gonna come inside, and then what it does is it's going to complete the metaphase 2 and give rise to the second polar body along with a zygote, because fertilization has happened, right? So this completes the the cycle of oocyte. But the question is, what if you know what if the secondary oocyte doesn't meet the sperm? What happens? Okay, nothing but, see, the basically the oocyte is going to wait, right? The oocyte is going to wait until the sperm comes and fertilizes the secondary oocyte. Who is allowing it to happen? So the person allowing it to happen is this guy over here. Okay, this guy is called as what? Corpus corpus luteum. Okay, so it is going to secrete something called as progesterone. So this progesterone makes sure the endometrial shedding doesn't happen. Okay, so it will give So it'll buy some time for secondary oocyte to wait for it to get fertilized. Okay. If that doesn't happen, if it, gets cheated, what happens? It gets very angry. So corpus luteum gets converted into corpus albicans, and that's the process of degeneration. So there'll be no longer availability of progesterone. So what happens is the secondary oocyte uh, just gets bled out along with the endometrial bleed that happens in the second cycle, next menstrual cycle of the woman. That's all. I hope it was crisp